After 40 years on this bench, I thought nothing could shock me anymore. I thought I had seen every kind of heartbreak that could walk through those doors. But on a Wednesday morning in October, a police officer walked into my courtroom in full uniform to testify against a drug dealer. And when the defendant was brought in, when I saw the officer's face change, when I realized the relationship between the man with the badge and the boy in handcuffs, something happened in that room that I will never be able to forget, because the officer didn't break down. He didn't ask for mercy. He stood at the witness stand and he looked at his own son, and he did something that no father should ever have to do. And then he said something to me, just to me, changed the way I understand what it means to love someone enough to destroy your own heart to save theirs. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because this is a story about the hardest kind of love there is, the kind that looks like cruelty on the outside, but is the only thing standing between someone you love and a grave. But before I get into this, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a municipal court judge in Baltimore, Maryland since 1985. 40 years of sitting in this chair. My mother was a nurse who worked the night shift at Johns Hopkins for 30 years. She taught me one thing I carry every day. She said, sometimes love has to hurt before it can heal. Don't confuse kindness with weakness, and don't confuse hardness with cruelty. Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do for someone you love is nothing. I never fully understood what she meant until that Wednesday morning. The case file arrived on my desk 2 days before the hearing. Drug possession with intent to distribute. The defendant's name was Derek Lawson, 19 years old, arrested on October 3rd during a narcotics operation in the Sandtown, Winchester neighborhood. Officers conducting a sweep of a known drug house found the defendant in possession of 47 individually packaged bags of heroin stamped with a logo the DEA had been tracking for months. Street value of roughly $4,700. He also had $1,800 in cash in a shoebox under the bed where he'd been sleeping. It was a solid case, clear evidence, multiple officers on scene. The kind of case that usually moves through the system quickly because there isn't much to argue about. But there was one detail in the arrest report that made me stop reading and go back to the beginning. The arresting officer was Sergeant Michael Lawson, badge number 4417. 22 years on the Baltimore Police Department, decorated 3 times. Commendations for bravery, community service, and a department medal for pulling 2 children from a car that had gone into the harbor in 2014. A career officer with a spotless record, and Derek Lawson's father. I read that line 3 times. Arresting officer Sergeant Michael Lawson, defendant Derek Lawson. Relationship, father and son. The father had arrested his own son. I put the file down and I stared at my wall. In 40 years, I have never seen this. I've seen fathers testify for their children. I've seen fathers testify against their children. I've seen fathers refuse to come to court at all because they couldn't face what their child had become. But I had never, not once, seen a father be the one to put the handcuffs on. Wednesday morning, October 11th. My courtroom was full. Drug cases always draw a crowd because there's usually a mix of family members, social workers, and neighborhood people who want to see what happens. I walked in and took my seat, and I looked out at the gallery. On the left side, near the front, a woman was sitting alone. She was maybe 45, with her hair pulled back and her hands gripping a tissue so tightly her knuckles were white. She wore a blue blouse and dark pants, and she had the kind of stillness that comes from trying very hard not to fall apart in public. I later learned this was Patricia Lawson, Derek's mother, Michael's wife. On the right side, a few rows back, there were two older women I assumed were family, an aunt, a grandmother, someone. They sat close together like they were holding each other up. I did not see Michael Lawson in the gallery. He wasn't there, not yet. The prosecutor called the case. She was a young assistant state's attorney named Dana Williams, sharp, precise. No nonsense. She laid out the fact. On October 3rd, the Baltimore Police Department Narcotics Unit executed a warrant on a row house at 1847 North Mount Street. The house had been under surveillance for 3 weeks as a suspected distribution point for a heroin operation linked to a larger trafficking network. Upon entry, officers found the defendant, Derek Lawson, in an upstairs bedroom with 47 bags of packaged heroin, a digital scale, packaging materials, and $1,800 in cash. The defendant was arrested and charged with possession with intent to distribute. Then she called her first witness, Sergeant Michael Lawson. The side door of the courtroom opened and Michael Lawson walked in. He was in full dress uniform, every button polished, every crease sharp. His shoes reflected the fluorescent lights. His badge was centered on his chest. He walked to the witness stand with the precise, measured steps of a man who had been trained to move with purpose. His back was straight. His jaw was set. His eyes were forward. He did not look at the defendant's table. Not once during that walk. He looked straight ahead like he was walking into a situation he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind. And maybe he had. He sat down in the witness chair and the prosecutor approached. She said, "Sergeant Lawson, please state your name, badge number, and your role in the arrest of the defendant on October 3rd. Michael Lawson's voice was steady. "Sergeant Michael Lawson, badge 4417. I was the lead officer on the narcotics operation that resulted in the arrest of the defendant, Derek Lawson." Dana Williams paused. She knew the question she had to ask. Everyone in the courtroom knew it was coming. She said, "Sergeant Lawson, can you please describe your relationship to the defendant?" And for the first time, Michael Lawson's voice changed just slightly, just enough that I could hear it from the bench. He said, "The defendant is my son." The courtroom shifted. You could feel it, that collective intake of breath that happens when a room full of people suddenly understands the weight of what they're witnessing. Patricia Lawson in the gallery pressed the tissue to her mouth. The two older women grabbed each other's arms. And at the defendant's table, Derek Lawson, who had been sitting with his head down and his public defender beside him, slowly looked up at his father for the first time. I'll never forget the look on that kid's face. It wasn't anger. I expected anger. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't even sadness, not yet. It was confusion, pure, raw confusion. Like he still couldn't understand how the man who taught him to ride a bike was now sitting in a witness chair testifying against him. The prosecutor continued. She walked Michael through the operation step by step. How they had received intelligence about the house on North Mount Street, how they had conducted surveillance, how they had obtained the warrant. She asked him to describe the moment he entered the upstairs bedroom and found the defendant. Michael Lawson's voice remained steady, clinical, professional. He described the room, the mattress on the floor, the bags of heroin lined up on a table, the scale, the packaging materials, the shoebox with the cash. He described it the way a good officer describes a scene, with precision and without emotion. Then Dana Williams asked the question that broke the room open. She said, "Sergeant Lawson, when you entered that bedroom and saw the defendant, what did you do?" Michael was quiet for a moment, the first real pause since he'd taken the stand. Then he said, "I identified myself as a police officer. I ordered the defendant to the ground. He complied. I handcuffed him and read him his rights." Williams said, "And at what point during this process did you realize that the individual you were arresting was your son?" Michael Lawson looked down at his hand. For 3 full seconds, he said nothing. The courtroom was silent enough that I could hear the heating vents humming. Then he said, "I knew before we went in." The room froze. Williams said, "You knew before the operation that your son was inside that house?" "Yes." "How did you know?" Michael lifted his head and looked straight at the prosecutor. "Because I'm the one who called it in. The noise that went through the courtroom was something between a gasp and a groan. Patricia Lawson made a sound I can only describe as a wounded animal. Derek's head snapped up, and he stared at his father with wide eyes and his mouth half open. The public defender put his hand on Derek's arm like he was trying to hold him in his seat. I leaned forward. I said, "Sergeant Lawson, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You are telling this court that you personally provided the intelligence that led to the narcotics operation at 1847 North Mount Street, knowing that your own son was inside?" Michael Lawson looked at me. His eyes were dry, but there was something behind them that I recognized. It was the look of a man who had already grieved, who had already done his crying in private in the dark where no one could see, who had made his peace with what he was about to do before he ever walked through that door. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, I did." I said, "Tell me why." And what Michael Lawson said next is something I have replayed in my mind every single day since. He took a breath. He sat up straight in that witness chair, and he spoke not like a police officer giving testimony, but like a father whose heart was in pieces, trying to explain why he had taken a hammer to his own life. He said, "Your Honor, my son was a good kid. He was a great kid. He played baseball at Frederick Douglass High School. He was a shortstop, quick hands, good instincts. His coach said he had a real shot at a college scholarship. He made honor roll his junior year. He had friends. He had a future. He had everything." He paused. Derek's senior year, something changed. He started coming home late. Then he stopped coming home at all some nights. His grades dropped. He quit the baseball team. His mother and I, we tried everything. We talked to him. We grounded him. We took his phone. We took his car. We got him into counseling. Patricia, my wife, she found a youth program at our church and dragged him there every Saturday morning. We did everything two parents can do when they can. Feel their child slipping away. He looked down at his hands again. Then one night, about 6 months ago, I was going through his room looking for, I don't know, anything that would tell me what was happening to my boy. And I found a roll of cash in his sock drawer. $2,300. My son didn't have a job. There is no legitimate way a 19-year-old with no job has $2,300 in his sock drawer. He swallowed hard. I confronted him. He told me to mind my own business. My son, who used to run to the door when I came home from work, told me to mind my own business. I told him I knew what that money meant. He laughed at me. He said, "Dad, you're a cop in Baltimore. You know how this city works. You know the system doesn't care about kids like me. At least on the street, I'm somebody. At least on the street, I eat." That's what my son said to me. A boy who never missed a meal in his life. A boy who had a roof over his head and two parents who would have died for him. He told me the street was where he mattered. Patricia was crying openly now, silent tears pouring down her face. I spent the next 3 months trying to pull him back. I called in every favor I had. I got him into a diversion program. He didn't show up. I got him a job interview at a warehouse. He didn't go. I drove to that house on North Mount Street myself in my personal car, out of uniform, and I knocked on the door, and I told the men inside that if they didn't stay away from my son, they would have a problem. They laughed at me. They laughed at a 22-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Department because they knew something I didn't want to admit. They knew Derek was there by choice. His jaw tightened. 2 weeks before the arrest, I got a call from a detective in our homicide unit, a friend. He told me there had been a shooting on Presbury Street connected to the same crew operating out of that house. 2 men shot, 1 dead. 23 years old. And my friend said to me, "Mike, I'm hearing your son's name in connection with this crew. Not the shooting, not yet, but the operation. It's only a matter of time before he's in too deep to get out, or he ends up on a slab." Michael Lawson's voice didn't crack. It went flat, dead flat, like he was reading a report about someone else's life. That night, I went home and I sat in my driveway for an hour. I sat there and I thought about every option I had. I could keep trying to talk to him. He wasn't listening. I could have someone else arrest him. That would happen eventually anyway, and it might happen after a shooting, after someone got killed, after my son was looking at 20 years instead of 5. Or I could do it myself. I could control the situation. I could make sure it was clean by the book. No violence, no mistake, no other officer putting a knee on my son's neck. I could make sure the charges were exactly right, not inflated, not reduced. I could be the one to pull him out of that house before that house put him in the ground. He looked at me and I saw it. The thing behind his eyes, it wasn't grief anymore. It was certainty. Terrible, unshakable certainty. Your Honor, I called in the tip because I am a police officer and I swore an oath to uphold the law. But I called in that tip because I am a father and I swore a bigger oath the day my son was born. I swore I would protect him, even if protecting him meant being the one to put him in handcuffs, even if it meant he would hate me, even if it meant my wife would never look at me the same way, even if it meant I would spend the rest of my life wondering if I did the right thing. I'd rather my son hate me from a prison cell than love me from a casket. Courtroom was destroyed. There is no other word for it. People were openly weeping. The 2 older women in the gallery were holding each other. A man in the back row had his face in his hand. Patricia Lawson was bent forward with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her body together. Even Dana Williams, the prosecutor, had her head down and her hand pressed flat on the table. And Derek was staring at his father with tears streaming down his face and his mouth open, and I could see his chest heaving. He looked like a boy who had just been hit by something he never saw coming. Not anger anymore, not confusion, something deep, something that I think in that moment he was feeling for the first time. The full, crushing weight of understanding what his father had done and why. Now, let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. What would you do if your child was heading toward destruction and nothing you tried could stop it? Would you have the strength to do what Michael Lawson did? Would you sacrifice your relationship with your son to save his life? Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if this story is hitting you the way it hit me, hit that like button for me. I called a 15-minute recess because I needed it. I went to my chambers and I sat at my desk and I pressed my palms against my eyes. In 40 years, I have never called a recess because I needed to compose myself. That day, I did. When we reconvened, the public defender presented Derek's case. He was a young attorney named Thomas Grant, court-appointed, clearly overwhelmed by what had just happened, but doing his best. He talked about Derek's age, his clean record before this arrest, his high school achievement, the fact that he had been recruited by older members of the drug operation who had targeted him specifically because he was young and impressionable. He argued for a reduced sentence, rehabilitation over incarceration. Then something happened that wasn't on anyone's schedule. Derek Lawson asked to speak. His attorney looked surprised. I could tell this hadn't been planned. Grant leaned over and whispered something to Derek. Derek shook his head. He said, loud enough for the courtroom to hear, "I need to say something." I looked at Grant. He hesitated, then nodded. I said, "Mr. Lawson, you have the right to address this court. Go ahead." Derek stood up. He was tall, like his father, same build, same jawline. He was wearing the khaki pants and white shirt that the detention center provides for court appearances. His hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table. He didn't look at me. He looked at his father. "Dad." One word. That's all he said at first, just that one word. And Michael Lawson, who had been sitting in the gallery since stepping down from the witness stand, who had maintained his composure through everything, pressed his lips together and his chin trembled just once. Then he was still again. Derek said, "I hated you. When they brought me in and I found out it was you, I hated you more than I've ever hated anyone in my life. I sat in that cell and I thought about every way I was going to make you pay for this. I thought about never speaking to you again. I thought about telling everyone what you did. I thought about hurting you the way you hurt me." Patricia made a small sound from the gallery. "But then I sat there for a week, and then 2 weeks, and I started thinking about something else. I started thinking about Darius." He stopped. His voice broke on the name. Darius Jackson. He was in that house with me. Same crew, same operation. He was 20. We used to play basketball together at the rec center on Pennsylvania Avenue when we were kids. Darius was funny. He could make anyone laugh. He was my friend. Derek's voice was shaking badly now. 3 days after I got arrested, Darius was shot and killed on Mosher Street, 3 blocks from that house. He was 20 years old, and they shot him in the chest, and he died on the sidewalk before the ambulance got there. And when I heard about it, when someone told me through the wall in that detention center, I sat on my bunk and I realized something. The tears were falling now, and he wasn't trying to stop them. That was going to be me. That sidewalk. That bullet, that was where I was headed. And the only reason I'm standing here right now instead of lying in a box is because my father loved me enough to arrest me. He loved me enough to put his badge, his career, his marriage, his reputation, everything on the line, not to punish me, to save me, and I was too stupid and too angry to see it. He turned and looked at his father. Michael Lawson was sitting rigid in his seat. His hands were clenched in his lap. His eyes were red, but the tears hadn't fallen. He was holding on with everything he had. Derek said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the money in the drawer. I'm sorry for the lies. I'm sorry for every time I told you to mind your own business when all you were doing was trying to keep me alive. I'm sorry for the look on Mom's face right now. I'm sorry for all of it. You did the right thing. I know that now, and I need you to know that I'm going to earn this. Whatever the judge gives me, however long it takes, I'm going to come out of this, and I'm going to be the man you raised me to be. The man I was before I threw it all away. I promise you that." He sat down. The courtroom was in ruins. Everyone was crying. The bailiff, the court reporter, Dana Williams, Thomas Grant, the people in the gallery, the man in the back row who I later learned was Michael's partner on the force for 15 years, and Michael Lawson. For the first time that morning, a single tear broke free and ran down his face. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall, just like his son had let his fall. I took a long breath. I looked at the evidence. I looked at the law. And I looked at the human beings in front of me. I said, "Mr. Lawson, please stand." Derek stood. "The evidence in this case is clear. You were found in possession of a significant quantity of narcotics and cash. The charges are serious, and this court takes them seriously. The law requires consequences." I paused. But this court also recognizes something that the law doesn't always have room for. It recognizes that you are 19 years old. It recognizes that you have no prior criminal record. It recognizes that you were recruited into this life by people who should have known better. And it recognizes that you have something most defendants who stand where you're standing do not have. You have a father who is willing to sacrifice everything, including your love, to give you this chance. The chance to be standing here today instead of lying on a sidewalk on Mosher Street. I looked at Michael in the gallery. I have seen thousands of parents in this courtroom. I have seen parents who made excuses for their children, parents who enabled them, parents who abandoned them, and parents who loved them. But I have never in 40 years seen a father love his son the way Sergeant Lawson loves you. What he did took more courage than any commendation or medal can represent. He chose your life over your love, and that, Mr. Lawson, is the most selfless thing a parent can do. I looked back at Derek. I am sentencing you to 18 months in a residential rehabilitation and workforce development program, not prison. This is a structured program with drug counseling, education, and job training. You will earn your GED if you haven't already. You will complete a substance abuse program, and you will have the opportunity to re-enroll in community college upon completion. If you violate the terms of this program, you will serve the remainder of your sentence in a correctional facility. But I don't think that's going to happen, because I think you finally understand what's at stake, and I think you understand what your father gave up so you could have this moment. I brought the gavel down. Derek turned around and looked at his father. Michael stood up from his seat. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the courtroom. All the anger, all the pain, all the months of silence between them hung in the air like something physical. Then Derek said, "I love you, Dad." And Michael Lawson, Sergeant Michael Lawson, badge 4417, 22-year veteran of the Baltimore Police Department, the man who had held his composure through the entire morning like his life depended on it, broke. His face crumpled, and he pressed his hand over his eyes, and a sob came out of him that sounded like it had been locked in a cage for months. Patricia was on her feet. She reached for Michael with one hand and reached toward Derek with the other, trying to hold her family together the only way she could. The bailiff looked at me. I nodded. He led Derek to his mother and father. The three of them stood there in the aisle of my courtroom, and they held each other. No words, just holding on. Just three people who had been through the worst thing a family can go through, finding their way back to each other in a room full of strangers. I stood up and walked to my chambers, closed the door, and I sat in my chair, and I didn't move for 20 minutes. I just sat there thinking about what I had witnessed. A father who arrested his own son, a son who understood why, a mother who somehow survived both, and a system that, for once, had enough room in it for mercy. Now let me pause again. If this story's getting to you, if you understand the weight of what Michael Lawson did, hit that like button. Share this video, because fathers like Michael don't get medals for this. They get silence. They get judgment from people who have never had to make an impossible choice, and they deserve to be heard. Derek completed the 18-month program. Every single day, he didn't miss a session. He didn't violate a single term. He earned his GED with honors. He completed the substance abuse program and became a peer counselor for other young men in the facility. His counselor told me later that Derek was the hardest working person she had ever seen in the program. She said, "That kid wasn't just doing his time. He was earning back his father's trust. You could see it in everything he did." When Derek was released, his father was waiting outside. Tricia was there too, and so were the two older women from the courtroom, Derek's grandmother and great aunt. They had a banner that said, "Welcome home," taped to the side of Michael's car. Derek walked out of the facility carrying a duffel bag and a certificate of completion. He stopped when he saw his father standing there in civilian clothes. No uniform, no badge, just a dad waiting for his son. Michael didn't move. He stood there and waited for Derek to come to him, like he was giving his son the choice. Derek walked over, he put his bag down, and he hugged his father. They stood there in that parking lot for a long time. Patricia joined them, the grandmother joined them, the great aunt joined them, and a family that had been blown apart by drugs and desperation put itself back together right there in a parking lot in Baltimore. About a year after Derek's release, I received an invitation in the mail. It was from the Baltimore Police Department's Community Outreach Division. They were hosting an event called Bridges, a program designed to connect at-risk youth with mentors from law enforcement. The keynote speakers were Sergeant Michael Lawson and his son, Derek Lawson. I went. I put on a suit and I drove to the community center on North Avenue, and I sat in the back row. The room was full of teenagers, parents, police officers, social workers, and community leaders. Derek spoke first. He stood up in front of 200 people and he told his story. All of it. The money in the sock drawer, the crew on North Mount Street, Darius Jackson, the arrest, hatred, the cell, the realization, the program, the recovery. He didn't leave anything out. He didn't sugarcoat it. Then he said something that silenced the room. He said, "Everyone in this room knows somebody who's on the path I was on. A brother, a cousin, a son, a friend. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking you can't reach them. You're thinking they don't listen. You're thinking it's too late. I'm standing here to tell you it's not too late, but I need to be honest with you. Words didn't save me. Love didn't save me. Not by itself. My father loved me my whole life, and I still ended up in that house with 47 bags of heroin. What saved me was consequences, real consequences delivered by someone who loved me enough to let me face them. My father didn't bail me out. He didn't make excuses. He didn't look the other way because I was his son. He held me accountable, and that accountability is the reason I'm alive. Then Michael stood up. He stood next to his son, and he looked out at the room. He said, I am not going to stand here and tell you it was easy. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than any door I've ever kicked in. Harder than any bullet I've ever dodged. I arrested my own child. I put handcuffs on the boy I taught to throw a baseball. And there were nights in the months after when I sat in my car outside my own house and asked God if I had made the right call. I didn't know the answer until I saw my son walk out of that program with his head up and his eyes clear. Now I know. The room gave them a standing ovation. Teenagers, police officers, parents, everyone on their feet. The Bridges program is still running today, 4 years later. Michael and Derek speak at it every quarter. They've reached over 2,000 young people. They've helped connect 150 at-risk youth with mentors. And they've started a hotline for parents who are watching their children go down the same road. Parents who need someone to tell them that the hardest choice might be the right one. They call it the Lawson Line. Derek is 23 now. He works for a construction company in Baltimore. He's a foreman's apprentice. He makes an honest living with his hands. He goes to his parents' house every Sunday for dinner. Patricia makes pot roast. Michael watches football. Derek sits between them on the couch, and he is alive, and he is free, and he is there, and that is everything. Michael told me something the last time I saw him. He said, Judge, people ask me all the time if I regret it, if I would do it differently, and I tell them the same thing every time. I would do it again tomorrow because my son is breathing, my son is working, my son is home, and Darius Jackson's mother will never be able to say that. That's what I mean when I say our choices matter. Michael Lawson made a choice that most people would never have the courage to make. He chose his son's future over his son's forgiveness. He chose a prison cell over a cemetery. He chose to be hated so that his son could be alive. And Derek made a choice too. He chose to understand. He chose to forgive. He chose to turn the worst moment of his life into a mission to help others avoid the same fall. If this story meant something to you, if you believe that real love sometimes looks nothing like what we expect, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, and check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe in something simple. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about giving people a chance to change. It's about recognizing that behind every case file is a family, a story, a father sitting in his driveway at midnight asking God what to do. And if we can't make room for that in our courtrooms, then we've lost sight of what justice really means. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you. Take care of each other. And if you're a parent watching this, hold your children close tonight, even if they're pushing you away, especially if they're pushing you away.